The air in the courtroom was heavy, the kind of heavy that makes it hard to breathe, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every seat was filled. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder in the press section, fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to catch every word. The defendant, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, leaned back in his chair with an expression that hovered between boredom and smug confidence. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and the faintest smirk curved his lips. But all eyes weren't on him. They were on her. The young woman stood at the witness stand, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood railing, though there was a subtle tremor in her fingers. She was dressed simply, a plain blouse and skirt, but there was something in her presence that made her stand out. She wasn't beautiful in the way magazines described beauty, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, a sharpness in her gaze that hinted at something more. Still, she looked out of place here, like she didn't belong in the chaos of lawyers and legal jargon. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority honed over decades. "Miss," he said, his eyes locking on hers, "you'll need to speak up. This court needs to hear your account clearly." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced briefly toward the prosecution table. The lead prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with a sharp jawline and a determined stare, gave her a subtle nod. It was a signal, the kind you give when you know the person in front of you is standing on the edge of something monumental. Still, the young woman hesitated. Her gaze swept the courtroom. There were people in the gallery who had no connection to the case. Locals who had shown up because the trial had made headlines. There were a few uniformed officers along the back wall, their arms folded, their eyes fixed on her with curiosity. And then there were the cameras. They weren't supposed to film inside, but she knew at least 3 sketch artists were already working, trying to capture her image for the evening news. Her lips parted as though she was about to speak, but no words came. Inside her mind, a different scene played out. A memory, the sharp scent of jet fuel, the roar of engines, the endless stretch of night sky dotted with stars, so vivid it felt like she could reach out and pluck one from the darkness. And then the sound, her own voice in a headset, crisp and steady, delivering coordinates, calling out positions, guiding others through danger. She could almost feel the cold metal of the console beneath her fingertips. The memory wasn't random. It was part of the reason she was here. Her testimony wasn't just about what she'd seen. It was about who she was. And revealing that meant unraveling a secret she had guarded for years. A secret that would change the way everyone in this room saw her. She knew once she spoke, there would be no way to take it back. The judge's brow furrowed. As he waited, the defense attorney shifted in his seat, clearly enjoying her silence, as though every second she hesitated was another point in their favor. The defendant's smirk widened, like he had already won. Her pulse quickened. She could feel the heat of dozens of stares pressing against her. Her breathing slowed, each inhale deeper than the last. She reminded herself of the rules she'd lived by during those missions. Stay calm, think ahead, never let them see you break. The prosecutor leaned slightly forward, her voice low but audible enough for the court to hear. "Whenever you're ready," she said. The young woman blinked, her focus snapping back to the present. She drew in a long breath and gripped the railing tighter. She knew the next words out of her mouth wouldn't just answer the judge's question. They would set into motion a chain of events that would expose everything she had fought to keep hidden. Her eyes shifted once more to the defendant, the man who thought this trial was his game to win. A flicker of something cold crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and prepared to speak. But instead of beginning with facts or dates, she planned to start with something else, something that would cut through the air like a blade and make every single person in the room see her differently from that moment forward. Her voice cut through the courtroom like a sharp wind. Echo 6. For a moment, no one reacted. The words hung in the air, seemingly meaningless to most people present. But then, as if someone had flipped a hidden switch, the room's atmosphere shifted. One of the officers standing along the back wall stiffened. A man in the gallery, whispered something to his neighbor. Eyes wide, even the judge's posture changed. A subtle leaning back in his chair, as though he'd just heard something he hadn't expected. Echo 6, the judge repeated slowly, testing the syllables. The young woman nodded, her expression calm, but her pulse pounding beneath the surface. That was my call sign, she said. During my years in the Joint Special Operations Command, murmurs erupted instantly. Some were skeptical, a few incredulous chuckles, a scoff from the defense attorney, but others were stunned into silence. The journalist in the press section scribbled frantically, as though afraid the words would vanish before they hit the page. The judge raised a hand, signaling for order, but his gaze never left her. Miss, he said carefully, you're telling this court that you were involved in classified military operations. Yes, she answered, without hesitation. Operations that, until today, I had no intention of discussing in a public setting. But the man sitting over there, she nodded toward the defendant, without actually looking at him, was involved in actions that put not just civilians but members of my own team in mortal danger. The defendant shifted uncomfortably for the first time since the trial began. His smirk faltered, replaced by something closer to annoyance. Or was it fear? The prosecutor seized the moment. Could you clarify for the court what your role as Echo 6 entailed? She asked, her tone respectful, but clearly aware of the weight this testimony could carry. The young woman inhaled deeply.
I was an aerial reconnaissance and communications officer. I coordinated real-time intelligence between ground teams and command. In short, I was the voice people heard in their earpiece when they needed to know where danger was coming from, or when they needed a way out.
Her words were measured, but every sentence painted an unshakable image. She wasn't just a bystander in life. She had been the invisible lifeline for soldiers in the most dangerous corners of the world, and now she was standing in a civilian courtroom, facing a man whose actions were about to be dragged into that same unforgiving light. The defense attorney rose slowly, his lips curling into a skeptical smile. So, let me get this straight, he began, pacing toward her. You're claiming that you, a civilian with no publicly verifiable record, were part of some shadowy military unit. That's quite a dramatic tale, don't you think? Her eyes didn't flinch. You can call it dramatic if you want. I call it the truth. He arched a brow. Do you have any proof of these supposed admissions? A faint smile touched her lips, but it wasn't warm. Everything I did was classified. But I do have one thing, something I've kept for years. A recording. This time, the murmurs were louder. The defense attorney hesitated, his confidence momentarily cracking. The judge interjected, his voice steady. A recording of what? Her fingers tightened on the railing. Of the night. This man, she gestured to the defendant with her chin, set in motion events that cost lives. I was on comms when it happened. I heard it all. I documented everything because I knew someday the truth would have to come out. The courtroom seemed to grow smaller, the walls inching closer, as everyone's focus locked on her. The air was thick with anticipation. Somewhere in the press section, a pen scratched rapidly against paper. The prosecutor leaned forward. And you're prepared to play that recording here? She nodded once, sharply.
Yes.
But you should know, once it's played, there will be no going back. Every person in this room will understand exactly what kind of man he is. Across the room, the defendant's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. The man's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Whatever control he thought he had over the trial was slipping, piece by piece. The judge regarded her for a long moment, then glanced toward the bailiff. If the witness is willing, and if the material is admissible, we will proceed. She reached into her bag, her hand brushing against the small worn case that held the device. Her breath slowed, steadying herself for what was about to happen. This was no longer just testimony. It was about to become something far more explosive, something that would shatter the illusion the defense had been so carefully constructing since the trial began. The device in her hand looked unremarkable, a small black recorder, scratched along the edges from years of being shoved into packs, dropped into pockets, and carried through dust storms and rain. But the way she held it, it was clear to everyone that it carried weight far beyond its size. The judge gestured for her to proceed. The prosecutor leaned forward, her expression focused, while the defense attorney shifted in his seat, eyes darting between his client and the witness. She placed the recorder on the stand's ledge and pressed a button. A burst of static filled the room, sharp and raw, pulling the attention of every person present. Then, a voice, her voice, but younger, sharper, came through the speakers. Command, this is Echo 6. I've got multiple hostiles. Closing in on grid 7. We've got a situation. In the background, faint shouts could be heard. The distant thud of explosions punctuated the air. Another voice, male, calm but urgent, responded, "Copy that. Echo 6. Extraction point." Her recorded voice came again. "Hold on." Then a pause, and then the sound that made the defense attorney stiffen in his seat. A familiar, unmistakable voice, giving an order in accented English. It was the defendant. The courtroom seemed to inhale at once. His voice was clear, commanding someone to alter a route. A change that, as the recording continued, became a deadly mistake. Within moments, the background of the recording erupted into chaos. Gunfire, overlapping commands, desperate calls for medics. A voice in the recording cut back in. Louder now. "Negative. Negative. That's taking them right into an ambush. Abort. Abort." But it was too late. The sound of an explosion, closer this time, blasted through the speakers. There were screams. A choked silence followed, broken only by the sound of her breathing, quick and heavy. In the present, the courtroom was frozen. The bailiff had stopped mid-step. The stenographer's fingers hovered over the keys, and several members of the gallery stared at the defendant with open disbelief. The defense attorney rose abruptly. "Objection. This." The judge held up a hand. "You will wait, counselor. Let the recording finish." The tape continued, revealing fragments of chaos, comms chatter, pleas for coordinates, and her voice trying to regain control of the situation. Through it all, the defendant's earlier command stood out like a death sentence, repeated in the minds of everyone who'd just heard it. Finally, the recording faded into static. She clicked the device off, and for several long seconds, there was nothing but silence. The prosecutor spoke first, her voice measured, but loaded with implication. "Miss, would you explain to the court what we just heard?" She looked directly at the jury. Not the prosecutor, not the judge, the 12 faces whose decision would matter most. "What you heard was the night we lost 3 members of my team. Men I trained with, fought beside, trusted with my life. Their deaths weren't an accident, they were the result of a deliberate misdirection, given by the man sitting right there." Gasps rippled through the room. The defendant stared at her with narrowed eyes, the smirk gone completely now, replaced by something colder. The defense attorney tried again. "There's no proof that voice belongs to my client. This could have been fabricated, doctored." She cut in before the prosecutor could respond. "Every mission comm was logged with encrypted metadata. That file contains an unbroken authentication signature from JSOC. You can check it yourselves. It's as real as the blood that soaked my boots that night." A juror in the front row shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others. The weight of her words was undeniable. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Miss, are you saying the defendant intentionally gave false coordinates?" "Yes," she said, without flinching. "And not because he made a mistake, because it served his own interests. Interests that cost lives." The gallery buzzed with whispers. A reporter was already typing furiously, no doubt composing the first explosive headlines. The defendant finally spoke, his voice sharp. "She's lying. This is some fantasy she's cooked up, because she couldn't handle the job. Enough," the judge warned, his gavel tapping lightly. "You will have your chance to respond through your counsel." But the damage was already done. The jury had heard the voice. They'd heard the chaos. They'd heard the desperation in her tone as she tried to save her team. The prosecutor stepped forward, sensing the momentum. "Miss, can you tell the court why you chose to keep this recording for so long without bringing it to light?" She hesitated for the first time, her gaze dropping for a moment. Because I was warned what would happen if I ever spoke about it. And until now, I believed them. But seeing him walk into this courtroom, hearing the lies, I knew it was time. Her eyes flicked back to the defendant, locking with his in a stare that made even the gallery go quiet again. The judge turned toward the defense.
Counsel, you will have the opportunity to cross-examine.
But for now, this testimony stands. The recorder sat between them all like a live grenade, small and silent but capable of destroying everything once the jury decided how much weight it carried in their deliberations. And still, there was something in her eyes that suggested the story wasn't over, that the recording was just the first layer of something far more dangerous waiting to surface. The defendant's attorney stood, straightened his tie, and strode toward the witness stand, with the calculated calm of a man who thought he could dismantle her credibility piece by piece. "Miss," he began, drawing out the word, "you claim this recording is authentic. Yet you sat on it for how many years? How many missions did you conduct after this alleged event, without saying a single word?" Her jaw tightened. "I carried it because I couldn't carry their faces anymore. This was my insurance. The only thing that would outlast fear." The attorney's lips curled in a faint smirk. "Or perhaps you waited for the right moment to make a name for yourself. A little fame. A little spotlight." "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "Speculation and character attack." "Sustained," the judge said, his eyes narrowing toward the defense. "Stick to relevant questions." The attorney pivoted. "Fine. Miss, tell us, who else was present in the command chain that night? Could someone else have issued those coordinates?" "No one else had the override authority. Only the operations lead. And on that mission, the operations lead was him." She tilted her head toward the defendant. Without breaking eye contact, the attorney's smirk faltered. "Just slightly." He returned to the defense table, whispering urgently to his client. The defendant shook his head, glaring at her like he could will her out of existence. The judge leaned forward. "Miss, earlier you stated you were warned not to speak. Can you elaborate on that?" Her eyes flicked to the gallery, to the back row, where a man in a plain suit and no expression sat with his hands clasped. "I received messages, phone calls from unlisted numbers, notes left at my door. Each one said the same thing: if you speak, people will disappear." The air in the courtroom felt thicker now, as if every person inside knew they were witnessing more than a legal dispute. The prosecutor stepped forward for the final set of questions. "Miss, why speak now, knowing the risks?" She took a breath and let it out slowly. "Because silence is the same as letting them win. And they've taken enough already." The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor," the prosecution rests. The defense declined to call further witnesses. It was clear their strategy had crumbled. The recording, authenticated by metadata and military encryption, was a wall they couldn't climb. The judge gave the jury their instructions. "You must decide based solely on the evidence presented and the testimony given. You will retire to the jury room to deliberate." Hours passed. The courtroom emptied, refilled, emptied again. Each time the doors opened, the defendant paced like a caged animal, and she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Finally, the jury filed back in. The foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge said. The man stood, jaw set, eyes locked forward. "In the matter of the People versus Alexander Reed, on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A shockwave of reaction rippled through the courtroom. Gasps, murmurs, even a few cheers from the back. The defendant slammed his fist on the table. "This is a setup. You think this ends with me?" His voice rose, eyes darting around the room like a predator searching for an exit. The judge banged his gavel. "Order. One more outburst and you will be removed from this courtroom." He leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Reed, you will be remanded to custody without bail until sentencing." The bailiffs moved in. He tried to pull back, but they held him fast, cuffing his wrists and guiding him toward the side door. As he passed the witness stand, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You just signed your own warrant." She didn't flinch. "I've lived under that shadow for years. You can't scare me with what I already survived." The bailiffs pushed him forward, and the door closed behind him with a final, heavy thud. Reporters surged toward her. Microphones out. Questions flying. What happens next? Do you think this will bring change? Are you afraid for your safety? She ignored them, stepping out into the open air. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar on her skin. The weight of truth, replacing the weight of silence. The man in the plain suit from the back row was waiting on the courthouse steps. He gave her a single nod, then melted into the crowd without a word. She wasn't sure if that meant she was safe, or if the real danger was just beginning. Either way, she knew one thing. Her call sign had frozen the court, but the fight for justice was far from over.